Yeah, it's next to reactions.
Okay. So I just started the recording, everyone. Welcome. As we get settled in, feel free to pop into the chat and let me know where you guys are tuning in from. I'm gonna go grab my knitting. Oh, well, let's see where everybody's tuning in from. British Columbia, New Jersey, Ontario, North Carolina, UK, New Jersey, California, Maryland, Wisconsin, Germany, Washington, Iceland, Seattle, Netherlands, California, New York, Amsterdam, Pennsylvania. I guess we could get started now, Julia. Are we ready?
Yes, we are.
So welcome everyone to this special edition of LBA Virtual Knit Night. We have our special guests, Saysha Greene and Tif Neilan, who are joining us. They are two designers who work with me on Worsted book. Saysha is the designer of the Saraya shawl, and Tif is the designer of the Stratified sweater and the Strata hat. So let me give you guys a little close-up look at those really quick. Hello, my LBA yarn nerds. Okay, so Saraya. Okay, so if you're just joining in, everyone, so please mute yourself. Everyone will remain muted during the knit night. Later in the evening, we'll have a chance to ask some questions to the designers. You'll raise your hand and then we will have you unmute. So Saraya is the half pie shawl that's featured in Worsted book in Coquelicot, Corrie Worsted, in this beautiful cable motif here. And Strata is the color block sweater using 5 colors of Corrie Worsted. And with the leftovers, you can make the Strata hat. Flip this back around again. I feel like every time I do Zoom, it's like brand new for me. So I thought that we would segue into the introductions. Let me just pin. Hi, Saysha, I'm pinning you. And I'm going to pin Tif. There we go. And I will be bringing forward Julia and myself. There we go. So just to let you know how the knit night will operate, Julia and I are the hosts. If you have any questions, you're free to pop them into the chat and Julia will try to note them down and we'll have a moment where we'll take questions from the chat. And maybe if we have enough time at the end, I will call out for questions and you can raise your hand. to ask your question. Does everyone know how to raise their hand in Zoom? I mean, you could do this and then maybe we'll see you doing it. But most times you can go down to your reactions and press raise your hand. And what happens is that brings you up to the top. So if you guys want to go ahead and try that, go ahead and do that right now, just to give it a try if you've never done it before. Okay, so Princess Denise just raised her hand. Suzanne, Gail, C, Cheryl, Andrea. Okay, wonderful. So you guys all know how to raise your hands. And what is really important is to lower your hands afterwards. So there we go. Okay, that's awesome. Just want to make sure that everybody knows how to raise their hand for a little bit later in the knit night. Okay, we're going to get started here. So I have a set amount of questions for the designers, but I thought that we would give them each an opportunity to introduce themselves. And I guess we'll start with Tif.
Okay. Just put that down for a second.
Hi, Tif.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tif Neilan. I live in Connecticut with my husband and our 2 daughters, and our 2 Labrador sons, Cody and Finn. Amy had mentioned, talking about kind of how we got started and how long we've been knitting. And it's kind of a funny story because, so I've only been knitting actually for 5 years. And yes.
I did not know that.
Yes. And I would say maybe the first 6 months was probably like a, accelerated, like 5 years of knitting condensed into a 6-month time period. Because it was sort of a way of me dealing with, I had suffered a very major medical event. And I developed like serious insomnia. And so I knit like 24 hours a day. And it couldn't be like boring knitting. I had to keep like keeping my brain busy. So I bought all the books that I could, and I watched as many tutorials as I could. And I was self-taught. So I didn't know that like herringbone stitch isn't the thing that you start knitting like 1 month in, But it's funny because my personality is like the day I decide I want to do something, I need to do it that day or it might not happen. So I learned to knit with colored pencils and yarn that my daughter had received in like one of those loom kits. So like really like scratchy acrylic yarn and a set of colored pencils. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know. And my husband recalls that we had gone out to a restaurant and I'm sitting there with like my colored pencils. And he's like, maybe before we go home, we should swing by like Michael's craft store and get you knitting needles. So that is how it started. But so I have a design background. My design background, I went to college for interior design, and that's what I did for 15 years. And I'd say, I've always known that my passion was in like creating. I love to do things with my hands. And the idea of taking a ball of yarn and turning it into a sweater, turning it into like, to me, it felt to me like the calling that like, the thing that I was meant to do that I had no idea I was meant to do. And so the love of knitting, like I said, it was 6 months in, I was like, oh my God, I love this. I can't understand how I lived my life without this. And so,
that's incredible.
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about your design process. So like when you want to start a design, how does it start for you?
Yeah. So often my designs really come to me very organically. So it's either that I saw a skein of yarn or I see there's a color palette that I'm like, oh, I'd really love to do something with that palette, or I see yarn and it's like, I love that. I don't know what I want to do with it yet, but I love it. And I'll keep it on my desk, or I'll keep a photo of something like visible. And it's usually like I'm driving somewhere and an idea kind of like pops into my head, or I mentioned sometimes I dream it and I wake up, I keep a notebook next to my bed, and I've had several designs that I've like designed in my dreams, which is, it sounds so crazy to say that, but it's, I think because, like, my mind is at rest and not at rest at the same time. But so, yeah, so usually it's like the yarn often drives the design. And with sweaters, I think it's a little bit different. Shawls for me very much is nature inspired. For my sweaters, that's usually like a color palette. A color palette just kind of gets locked into my brain. And I use the program Procreate. And I sketch and sketch and sketch. And it's so fun because those are the days that I feel like, I'm a little kid coloring, but without fail, that's just for me, like that kind of necessary, like allow your brain to just go wherever it wants to go. And then I'm so excited, like the design gets kind of like locked in, I sketch it, and then 3 days later, I'm like halfway through it because I get so excited that I can't put it down.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what was your inspiration behind Stratified from Worsted book?
So Stratified was, it's kind of like a 3-step process there because, so there was a design in my head early last year that I wanted to do a striped sweater that was a little unconventional, and it had maybe a variation of the sequence of colors or the size of the stripes or something that was just a little bit different than the typical, like even, repetitive stripe. And so my Heart and Homebody sweater was the first design to kind of fulfill that idea. But ironically, the design that I had initially developed is on my needles right now. And it is this striped sweater that I'm knitting in Pearl Soho linen quill. So this is sort of how the design concept had started, of having these stripes are, each one is the same size, followed by a skinnier, but the color sequence varies just slightly in that it's a dark green, pink, teal, and then a light green, pink, teal. And so that was kind of the initial concept. And then I found the color palette for Heart and Homebody, and I wanted to do a raglan. This is a circular yoke. So the development kind of started there. I did it as a bulky weight because I kind of wanted it to knit up in like 4 days. I was just so anxious for it. And so Stratified, it was ironic because in my brain, I thought, oh my God, so I love this. I love Heart and Homebody as a bulky weight, but like realistically, I wear DK to worsted far more often. I need to do a version of it that is that weight. And so, the timing of
it all.
Absolutely. It was kismet. It was perfect.
Yeah, because I had just started wanting to launch into worsted, and she had just released Heart and Body. And I was like, Tif, do you want to do this for my book? But like with Corrie Worsted, and the timing of it all had just happened perfectly. So.
It did. It was perfect. And part of the, what was different about Stratified from Heart and Homebody is that for that design, one of the things that I really liked about using the variety of colors was, I feel like in my head, each season to me has like signature colors that I feel like are like my comfort zone. And I thought, how fun would that be to be able to use like all of your, like, this is my fall comfort palette, to be able to use that in a garment. And so I loved it. Like when I loved seeing Jan's sweater and like the blues and the greens, and seeing your sweater and Yana's in the, like, the color palette that spoke to everyone. It's so different. Like each sweater is so different.
Let me pull Yana up because it'll be interesting. Julia's wearing my sample, and okay. Yana and I use the same colors. So let me just,
and even in the different orientation,
in a different order. So Yana is one of Tif's test knitters, and she coordinates the yarn purchasing through us. And I remember we went back and forth over emails. And when Yana finished on this last 5 colors, I looked at that and Julia was there. I said, yes, that's my sweater. But I switched the order of the colors because I wanted more. You wanted the pink closer to my face. Yeah. And it really does change the vibe just slightly.
Yeah,
it does. It really does.
And that was kind of the thing that I liked so much about this design, is that so each, everybody is picking their own colors. And so that's the thing about hand knits, right? Is that you get to make it your own. Like you get to it's your way of saying, this is who I am, and being able to express yourself. And so even that the two of you use the exact same palette, you made it your own. You wanted the pink up near your face, and it looks like a different sweater. And so I just love it so much. I love how different they can all look.
So the hat strata in the book, this is the order of the colors that you used. And in that same theme that I wanted more pink, I did not follow the same color pattern. If I had, is this the one? Yeah. If I had followed the same color pattern that you said in the book, but my hat would have looked like this.
Yep. And
I wanted a pink hat, obviously. So I used the pink instead for my main color. And this is a great project to really kind of play around with the colors. So I tell people, pick your 5 favorite colors.
Yeah.
And you can stick them anywhere and it's gonna come out incredible.
Yeah.
So Yana, tell us, how did you choose these colors? What inspired you behind these colors? Oh, you're muted. Hold on, let me ask you to unmute. There you go.
So I knew I wanted caramel because I knew the sweater was going to come out in the fall, and I thought, well, caramel is sort of like this fall rustic color. And then I thought, I wanted to sort of pop, and I don't want my colors to be all over the color wheel. I imagined something where the colors were more concentrated in one area of the color wheel. So, and it sort of pinks and lavenders, those are sort of my comfort zone colors. So I gravitated towards the pink and lavender, and I knew I wanted the caramel next to that. So that was sort of my starting point. And then I knew I needed a dark color. So I picked the red because it had some warmth in it that I thought went well with the caramel. And the red is out of my comfort zone.
It's out of my comfort zone too.
It's totally out of my comfort zone. I never wear red, but I thought it was, it's darker, so it'll be sort of a grounding presence for the sweater, even though it's red. And then the lighter color, I just sort of like a neutral to balance it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, let me just continue I have questions for Tif. I want to know more. Tif, actually, I think this is Julia's turn to ask questions now.
Oh, okay.
we split the questions up between the both of us.
So we were wondering, Tif, what kind of things do you knit for yourself?
So I'm pretty addicted to knitting hats, and I don't need another hand knit hat for the rest of my life or my next life, but I can't stop knitting hats. I love hats. And I love shawls. As much as I truly enjoy knitting a sweater and getting to wear it and be cozy. But if you told me that I had to pick one thing that I was knitting for the rest of my life, I would knit shawls. I love having things cozy up by my neck. And I feel like that would be bliss forever. All the shawls. Since I already have all the hats.
Well, you need a matching hat and shawl,
I know. Yeah.
And also, are there any designers out there that inspire you?
Yes. So my absolute knitting designer inspiration is Isabel Kramer. I discovered her probably a month into my knitting journey. Her caramel sweater was the first sweater that I knit. And everything that she puts out, like, I'm like, oh my God, I love, like, everything. But I think what I love most about it is that I feel like, for me, like, I always want my designs to be approachable. And even if they have difficult elements, I want, like, the majority of it to be pretty easy knitting. You know, that it can be relaxing, and it can be, like, for me, it's a big stress relief. So I don't personally enjoy a pattern where, like, I have to hyper focus on it the entire time. Like, that's stressful to me. And I think that that's the vibe that I get from all of her patterns, is that they're interesting and they're beautiful, but they are not, like, intimidating, or the kind of pattern that, like, you know, that you're stressed out, like, the entire time you're working on it. So yeah.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. I've been knitting for, I think I counted the other day, 24 years. Wow. And in the beginning, I was all about learning every single technique I possibly could. So I was doing, like, complicated lace, socks, 2 socks at the same time, 2 sleeves at the same time, you know, all this. Now I've been knitting for so long that I'm like, I just kind of need to knit where I don't have to look at my knitting anymore and just go for it. So yeah, I can totally relate to that. Yeah. All right. So I have a question for you. What are you knitting right now?
So currently, I have the Pearl Soho sweater.
Right.
Okay, so I have like 17 whips, but
what? Wait, say that again.
I have 17 whips.
Yay!
I counted them the other day because I was like, I should clear all my needles before next year. And I was like, that's impossible.
Julia, how many whips do you have? Because you have a lot.
I've stopped counting. I put them on hibernating on Ravelry. I don't know. At least 10, but I just, you know, I'll revisit them one day. It's okay. Yeah. I can just keep casting on other things.
If we're being honest, probably 10 of them are gonna get frogged because I don't even know where I am with them. Like, my brain is so out of it that.
Yeah, me too. Every year I feel like I do a frogging session where I get all my whips out and decide this one I frog, this one I keep. And
yeah, it needs to happen.
I feel like young knitter Amy was like that. I used to have tons of whips, and then something happened about like 6 years ago. It's like when I started La Bien Aimée, I took all my whips, and I had just read Clara Park's book about, you know, having a whip for too long, so like frog it. You know, and so what I did was I frogged it and I gifted the yarn away, and it felt nice just to kind of clear my palette. I've actually become quite the monogamous knitter. I just work on one project.
It's true, you absolutely are. Even with socks, I think you finish a pair of socks before you start one. But I have to say, in the chat, there are more polygamous knitters out there. Yeah, Lisa says 17 whips. I can relate. Amy says she can't even count her whips.
When I realized it was bad when I needed to try on my sweater and I didn't have any spare needles to like
that happens all the time.
And I have 3 full sets like the Tiago, and I was like, oh my God, how many projects do I have going? But something fun for the break is that I did officially cast on my Graybow shawl. So here's a teeny tiny baby part to it.
That's exciting.
I'm so excited. And I'm going to use all of my stratified colors. I did also pick up Yellow Brick Road from Jan, from Forever Yarn, when we were at Cake Palooza. And my husband said to me, he said, you said you're not working during the break. And I'm like, I mean, this is technically work because like I'm knitting the sample, but I'm so excited about it. And the pattern is fully written, and it's like, it's just going to be like my blissful knitting for 2 weeks. So I'm really
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a couple fun questions to ask you. If you could be a knitting technique, what knitting technique would you be?
Well, I would be herringbone stitch just because I
knew
so over the top in love with it. I love it. But I think the thing that draws me to it so much, like, I mean, I love that it's like, it's tidy and refined and it's beautiful. And it's like, there's so many purposes for it. I'm familiar with it from interior design, you know, like herringbone floors, and it's used in home, except like baskets and things for structure. But the structure part of it is like what I love so much. And since I'm a super type A personality, I think it's the perfect stitch technique for me to be.
Before I ask the last question, Tracy from the chat is asking if you could stand up and show your sweater that you're wearing.
Yeah. So I'm wearing our Meadowland sweater.
Which I have mine.
So,
or to kind of too, I have mine too.
Like if I fully stand up, you don't see all of it, but yeah. So that's, and
super
I love
cute.
It. It's so cozy.
That one is a really cozy one. It's like, that's like middle of winter kind of sweater to wear.
It is. And actually it's 55 degrees outside today, but it's cold in my house. So I was like, oh, I can totally get on board with the cozy. Yeah.
All right, last question. If you were stuck on a desert island and you had to take one yarn with you, what would it be?
I would take a perfectly speckled, like 4-ply fingering weight yarn with me, because as we all know, I love to like hold yarns double and do things, but I feel like for me, like the DK weight is the perfect weight for everything. And like a good speckle that you can hold double, that's where it's at.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to bring forward your test knitters here. I'm going to spotlight them so that we can meet them, and then they can show their stratified. And we have Yana. There we go. Okay, I'm going to ask all the testers to unmute. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hey.
So I always, I'm always interested in seeing what the test knitters knit for designers. A long time ago, I used to test knit. I can't test knit anymore. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I've been knitting for so long, but whenever I test knit for somebody, I just autocorrect while I'm knitting. And then I was like, wait a minute, was that a mistake? Or like, you know, I'm a really bad test knitter because I can't stick to the pattern. So I just wanted to meet some of the test knitters who participated in the test knit of Stratified. So I thought that we could go around and each of you can introduce yourself. We'll start with Kiana. Why don't you tell us how long you've been knitting and tell us about your Stratified sweater?
Absolutely. So I am Kiana, and I've only been knitting since 2018.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I started knitting from watching someone on the train. I was traveling, going to work, and I said, oh, I always wanted to knit. And she said, come over to my house, I'll show you. And I said, okay. And in 2 hours, I was knitting and purling. So that's how it started. So by Stratified, and I'm going to bring mine down a little bit with the color word so you can see it.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Tell us about the yarn that you used.
I absolutely will. So I use Malabrigo Rio, and that's this,
nice.
I'll point to them that's this blue color right here. And then I use Primrose, which is the creamy color, as well as this, if you can see, it's a light blue right here. It might be hard to see. And then this yellow color right here.
Very nice.
And then the darker blue right here on this arm right here is actually Wandering Flock.
I love that. This sweater has become like a collaboration of all these yarn brands into one sweater. That's incredible. I love that.
And each one of the yarns was for a totally different project. So I was just like, oh, let me just grab this. So no more to those other projects. I'm sorry. And I received, I got all my yarn from Yen for Forever Yarn in Doylestown in Pennsylvania. I think one of the other questions you said, how long have I been test knitting?
Yeah. How long have you been testing? So you've only been, okay, let me get this straight. You've been knitting since 2018.
Yes.
Okay. How long have you been test knitting?
I've been test knitting since June of 2020.
Awesome.
I believe that's what it was. Yes, June of 2020. And I started test knitting for Yen. She had 2 amazing sweaters that I was selected to do for her. And then in February, she introduced me to Tif in February of 2021, which was my first test for her, was the heart and homebody.
Okay.
And now I'm on my 13th test knit for Tif.
Wow.
I've also test knitted for Rose Beck.
Oh, great.
Yes, with the bags. Yes, I did one and Flow. So those are the designers that I've test knitted for thus far.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for test knitting. Test knitters are super important. Each of the test knitters have put their Instagram handles in there. So if you guys want to go follow them to see what they're knitting, I actually really love following test knitters of designers because it just gives me a lot of inspiration to see what kind of colors they're using, what kind of yarns they're mixing together. It's really cool. Thanks, Kiana.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Tell us about your knitting origin story and how long have you been a test knitter?
Yeah, I have been knitting for like 26 years. I started knitting as a teenager. I know. My school was reading A Tale of Two Cities, and one of my good friends decided to bring her knitting to our like discussions, and the teachers thought that was really cool, and so they let her do it. So I asked her to teach me. So within like 2 days, I had like all the supplies because I couldn't put it down. So, and I've been knitting ever since. I will say for a long time, I didn't branch out because in that day, of course, there was like no Ravelry and all of that stuff. So I knit a lot of hats and a lot of scarves, very simple garter stitch or stockinette for a very long time. And I think kind of more recently got back into knitting over the past 8 years after my son was born, and I needed something to do while he was napping in the car. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so that's been great. I've only been testing for maybe the past 3 years or so. I just kind of fell into it actually after getting asked by Andrea Mowry to test the Shifty sweater. And so that kind of kickstarted all of that. So I test for her, I test for Annie of the Sprig Knits a lot, and I test for Rachel Reese of September Knits a lot.
Oh yeah.
And then other designers here and there. This was my first test for Tif, and it was amazing to work with her. And I love this sweater. It was so much fun to make. So if you haven't cast one on, you should. I knit mine up in Cascade 220. I think Amy and I kind of went back and forth a little bit, but I have to say I'm one of those people, especially for something that needs this much color. I like to go to my local yarn store and just like look at the wall of colors. So I'm very tactile that way. And so I was trying to make all these collages with the sample pictures that you had sent us, and I just like couldn't visualize it in my brain. So finally I was like, I need to start this test so that it's done. So I just went. So it's Cascade 220 non-superwash. And for me, the color palette started with this top color, which I think is a little bit, it's called Sea Crust. It's like a little bit washed out from
is it like a green, like a foam green color?
Yeah, it's like a seafoam green color.
Yeah, definitely.
So I was obsessed with it on the wall. And so then I just sat and played until I got all of this. So I don't know if I can. There we go.
Yeah, it came out really well. I remember seeing this pop up on Instagram immediately, and I was like so excited. I mean, for the longest time, Cascade 220 was like one of my favorite yarns when I was a baby knitter. You know, it's just like you see all their colors, and it's super inspiring to knit with. So
yeah, it was one of my first yarns too as a baby knitter, and I hadn't been back to it for a while. So I knew that this store down the street had like 1,000 of their colors in stock, so I just gonna go there.
And they have so many colors. Oh my gosh. Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Sarah. It was so nice to meet you.
Nice to be here.
All right, let's move on to Yan.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Can hear you just fine. So tell us about your knitting origin story. How long have you been knitting, and who taught you to knit?
I've been knitting for very long. I started knitting like in my middle teenager years. I cannot remember exactly how old I was, but I know when I got into college, I was like knitting, you know, and I really enjoyed it. I learned the knitting from my grandmother, my aunt, and my mom, mostly from my grandmother and my aunt. And I still clearly remember that me, my younger sister, and one of my cousins, we curled up on a big sofa, and that one day, and we just all started knitting. And they didn't stick to it, and I stick to it. I think part of the reason is I always like to imagine how I can put things together and something beautiful is eventually gonna pop up, you know, because I really love gardening as well. So I used to dream about if I put this plant along with that plant, you know, like they all gonna eventually blooming so beautifully. So I think that's in line with why I love knitting. So I've been knitting for a long time.
That's awesome. I can totally relate to the story about everyone in the family not learning to knit and I'm being the only one. I'm in a family of 5 kids and my mom taught us all, but I was the only one that knit for the longest time. And just recently during the pandemic, 2 of my other siblings decided to learn to pick it up knitting. But they had, the thing is, the funny thing they said was like, we already knew how to knit because they'd watched my mom and myself knit for so long. They were like, we knew how to knit. But yeah, I can totally relate to that. I would like you to tell us about your sweater. And I think I'm going to pin you. I'm going to spotlight you because,
okay.
Sorry, because your screen is turned the other way. That way we can see the colors.
Can everybody see?
Yes.
Okay. So I actually tested knitted for Tif for the homebody, that sweater. So in that particular sweater, I had pink in it, which pink is quite a bit of my favorite color as well. So I thought I definitely don't want to go to the pink family. I'm gonna go with something different. You know, I been loving a couple of colors created by Aimée and her team at the La Bien Aimée. So including French gray right here. And this is the yellow brick road. And then Winterfell and Yona is the green. And I have a big stretch of Yona right there. So of course I went to those colors right away. But then I had to think about it on whether they will be able to work together to be really translate Tif's design. And also I need an additional color. So Aimée and her team really worked with me on, I ended up, I think, you know, I was staring at the color chart Aimée shared with me for a long time. Then I had to like give options on certain colors, you know, from color 1 to color 5. Some colors I had questions. So Aimée has helped me to narrow down, like this is the pink gray color. So anyway, so that's how I landed with this 5 colors. And I love how it came out. I cannot say this is a typical group of color that I usually would go to, but I absolutely love it, the way how it's coming out.
I think it looks amazing. I remember working with you on that. I think I'm spotlighted all by myself. Let me just pin some people. Hold on a second. Sorry, I think I have Julia spotlighted. All right, so the thing is, like, we're recording this and I want to make sure that I have the right view. Hi, now there's everybody. The last time we filmed our knit night, we did not pin everybody correctly. It was very weird. Okay, there we go.
Because I was recording and I clearly don't know what I'm doing.
Well, I don't think I would have known either. So let me just pin everyone back up here again. I tell you, every time I get onto Zoom, it's like brand new for me. And I've been doing this for 2 years and Let me see, did I forget anyone? And there's Sarah. There we go. So yeah, I remember working with Jan on her colors, and I remember you telling me that you were picking colors that were outside of your comfort zone. And so, and I really think that Stratified is a great pattern that's adapted towards this so that you can really push yourself outside your comfort zone. That's exactly what I did. So that will let me segue over to Yana. Hi.
Hey, hi.
So Yana was my inspiration for my Stratified, which Julia's wearing right here. And as I said before, and Yana, tell us your knitting origin story. How long have you been knitting and how long have you been test knitting?
I started knitting, my grandmother taught me when I was about 8 years old. And it was just, you know, with some acrylic yarn and the plastic needles and just us sitting together. At some point when she was visiting, you know, we lived across the country. They were in Montreal, we were in Oregon, and she visited for several months and we just would sit and knit together. But then I didn't really knit much after that. And I started again right after college. And of course, the second item, I think I started with a basic sweater, the cable down the front. And then the second sweater that I knit was color work and steeked. But it was just crazy. And then I think that took me years to finish because again, it was very, very intermittent. And I started knitting a lot then when I was pregnant with my first daughter. And I've been basically knitting pretty intensely from that point on. Sweaters, hats, shawls. I've only knit a handful of socks and actually none of them are for myself. They've all been gifts. So I don't even own a pair of hand knit socks. But so that's my knitting origin story. I've been test knitting only since March of this year.
Oh,
it's really new, but I love it. I love having the deadline and I love having something, you know, that is just, you know, that's new that no one else has done before. And then what I love most is that sense of community. So being able to get to know the designer a little bit and kind of building more of a yarn community and more connections there.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because we have a lot of patterns that go through La Bien-Aimée through yarn support. So we have our test knitters who became sample knitters, you know, because we've worked with them for so long. And then we just like kind of build up this community of knitters. And working on Worsted book, I got to know all of these test knitters throughout all the designs of the book. So that's why we wanted to have this series of knit nights with each of the designers so that we could, you know, spotlight a little bit the test knitters as well, because it's such an important process in the design process. So, yeah.
So I've test knit also. So for Tif, I did a Break in the Tide shawl. And I'm test knitting for her now, a new sweater that has some color work where again, I got to pick 5 colors. So that's really fun. But I've also test knit for Janetta Knits. She's a Latvian knitter, but she's in the UK. And my first one ever was a hat for this Bird Knits. And then I just did a hat. Oh, I've done Greta Manson, a couple shawls for her. Those are just beautiful with all the cables. And then I just did a hat for Isabel Kramer.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Very nice. Thanks, Jenna. All right, so let's pull up Wendy. Hi, Wendy. Hold on, I asked you to unmute.
Unmute. Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Wendy.
Okay. Hi.
So tell us about yourself a little bit.
Okay, so I learned to knit. It'll be 15 years this coming February. We adopted both of our boys, and so with our first, when we went to meet the birth mother for the first time, she taught me to knit, and so I didn't know anything about knitting, and so I picked an eyelash. This is my very first thing. I picked an eyelash.
I have totally yarn, knit something like that.
And I thought it was one length the whole way. And, you know, it wasn't. And I frogged so many times with this, learning how to do it. And she's a little OCD. So she was freaking out the whole time. Every time I'd go, no, this is wrong. And I'd rip it out. No, it's wrong. And so, yeah, I still have it. And I have no idea how I decreased. I have no idea how I managed to increase at the other side to make it kind of look alike. but you know, it's special. And I've, that's how I learned to knit. And I have test knit for someone else. And the pattern was just that was my never give up sweater. And I had to rip that thing out week after week, day after day. And it took me about 3 weeks to get that one done. And she's like, are you going to give up? And I'm like, no, I'm not giving up.
Oh, that's good.
So, and I didn't do much knitting because after our first was born, then 13 months later, we had a second. And so I just did a lot of scarves. And we homeschool. And so a few years ago, I was like, I need something for me. So I've always been crafty, but I got back into knitting. I did my first test knit for Leslie Friend. And that was in March of 2020. And so, and then I've done, this is my third test knit for Tif. And so a couple of them were gifts, so I don't have them to show. And like I said, I test knit for a couple other sweaters, but designers, but and then my colors, this is your
could you stand up and show us your sweater a little bit?
Sure, I can give it a go.
I think we can name all these colors.
Pretty.
I think I remember this. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Lovely. So we've got, what is it? Is it French gray?
Winterfell. Is this Winterfell? Yeah. And then there's smoke in here.
Okay, so smoke is the light gray. No, smoke's the light gray up at the top.
Or is this smoke?
Yeah,
the light gray smoke.
Yeah.
And then quartz fume.
Yeah, quartz fume.
Okay, there you go. And mist is in here.
Oh yeah.
And then Madeline.
Yeah, Madeline is that dark purpley, and then mist is the gray. I love that. It's super moody and so nice.
So, and and then later I looked in my closet and I have a shawl that's very similar to this. I'm like, no wonder I got those colors.
Well, you know your colors. So.
I do. I was just, but so I love working for Tif. She's awesome. And I'm designing something of my own right now. So that's taking a little time, but I hope she'll pick me again in the future.
Definitely.
Thanks so much, Wendy. All right, well, we're coming up to about 10 minutes before the hour. I thought that we could take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we're gonna sit down with Saysha and talk with Saysha. So what happens during the break is I'm just gonna put on some music, and that way you guys can get up from your computer, go get a drink or something like that, and we'll be back. So let's take a 5-minute break and we'll be back. Welcome back, everybody. Just let you guys all get settled in. I'm going to go ahead and pin myself. No, I guess I am already pinned. Let's do this. I'm going to speaker. No. All right. Hi, Saysha. I'm pinning you. I'm going to bring up Julia too. There we go. Hold on a second. I want to make sure I have the right view on my computer because there we go. I think this is right. If you guys saw our recording before, it was like, yeah. Okay. So welcome back, everybody, after the break. If you just tuned in, we just had a few people join us right at the top of the hour. We just took a break and we're coming back to talk with Saysha Greene. Hi, Saysha.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Saysha was the designer of the Saraya shawl, which I have here. This is like one of my most favorite shawls to wear this winter. I don't know if you guys, I don't even know. Julia, when did I do the little styling thing where I like put it on with my cape?
I think it's when you and I did on the day of the, was it on the day of the release of Worsted?
Yeah.
We did a little live to show everyone the inside of the book.
Well, I thought I would just do that again because I got a couple DMs from people because they were like, how do you wear a shawl like that? And so this is how I wear it. So usually what I do is I put the shawl on first and I style it the way that I want it to look. And then I put on my coat. So this year I've been wearing my cape a lot because winter's been kind of mild here in Paris. And what you do is you just take your coat and you tuck it up underneath the sweater and then it's perfectly styled and you don't have to worry about it. And I'm like super protected. And you know, in France, the art of wearing the scarf is, it's an art here. It's an art form and I definitely learned it. And so Saraya for me is like one of the most perfect shawls to wear. I love this like semicircle shape. I mean, look at this. It's amazing. Okay, I have to take it off now because it's really hot inside, but.
Yeah, I like it that way, the way that you have it draped around your neck, or you can just wear it over your shoulders.
Or you can wear it over your shoulders. Sometimes when I'm sitting here working in my office, I'll have it over my shoulder. And in the book, when Yona was taking photos of me with the Saraya shawl, she was like, how would you wear this? And it was really funny because we were shooting those photos in the summertime. So I just was like, okay, this is how I would style it. And just imagine that I have a coat. And that's kind of how she was able to capture some of those images of me wearing Saraya in the book. Saysha, tell us about yourself, please.
Sure. So I am born and raised in New Jersey. I still live in New Jersey. I have two kids. I have a daughter who's 12 and a son who's 22. So there's a little gap in my kids' ages. And my background, my education, and my corporate career is in information technology. So my degree is in computer science. And so for many, many years, I designed and built computer, solutions, applications, websites, business intelligence type solutions. But, I always, when I talk to people about that part of my life, I still think that was like a creative outlet for me. Like everything, I think people who like to create find a way to create. It doesn't matter what they're doing. And so, it takes creativity to be a computer programmer, to design a program, and every programmer will do it a little bit different than the next one. The same thing with designing a garment. So for many years, that was my creative outlet. I learned to crochet and sew from my mom. And for a long time, I was really intimidated by knitting, and I never would knit. I actually would pay people to knit something for me. So I would commission people to knit things for me because I was very intimidated. But I did learn the knit and the purl stitch when I was in high school. And I would say, like, my knitting experiences, there would be decades in between. So I learned the knit and the purl stitch. And then like a decade later, I was on vacation with my husband in Australia and New Zealand. And there were so many sheep and so much wool and so much like inspiration. I'm like, oh, I could do something. We were there for 22 days or something like that.
Wow.
And so we were in the bus a lot, or we were on planes. So I did pick up some yarn, and I picked up some needles, and I picked up a knitting book. And the first thing I knit, and I went on the break to get it because I was inspired by the person who showed her first knit. So the first thing I knit was a pair of socks while I was on vacation in Australia. And the socks were for him. And I'm going to show you these socks because you can tell by looking at them that I didn't know what I was doing. These are the socks. They are very thick. They're like sweaters for your feet. They can stand up on their own. They're like boots. They're like knitted boots, these things. It was like the wrong weight yarn, the wrong needles, but it didn't matter. He still wears them.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
They're like house socks. So that was actually the first thing I ever knit, was this pair of socks.
That's amazing.
And that was just from the little book that I bought when I was in Australia. So probably 10 years passed again, and I had my son, and I had a coworker who knit, and she walked me through knitting him a little sweater. And then another 10 years passed, and I had my daughter. And I think that was like the point for me. So that's like, say, 12 years ago, where knitting really became something that was really a part of my life, like every day. Because there were so many resources at that point. Like, I was no longer just looking through a little, like, magazine or book. There was Ravelry, there was Knitty. There were so many like online resources that, I hadn't been exposed to before. And so that's when it really took off for me. And I went into a local yarn store, and I picked up a skein of Malabrigo and a pair of needles, and I knit again my first item from that decade, which later on became Tannenbaum, which is a cowl design that I have on Ravelry. So I didn't at the time publish it. I just, I knit it and I wore it. And, many years later, when I was finally publishing patterns, I said, oh, you know what? I should write this up. Somebody else may want to knit this. And so
what year was that? So was that officially your first design, the Tannenbaum?
So that actually wasn't well, I would say, yeah, it was officially the first one, but I didn't publish it. The first one that I published is called the Brioche Waffle Beanie, which uses like a half brioche stitch. And at the time that I did that, I didn't even know that is what the stitch was called. Like I was playing around with stitches and trying to figure out what it was that I was trying to do. Like there was some, you know, something that I wanted for myself, and I was just playing around, and I thought, oh, I'm like creating stitches over here. I'm like inventing stuff. And then later on, I was like, hold up a second. And then I figured it out. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I'm not inventing stuff. So, but it uses like a form of like a half brioche stitch, and so that was the very first one. And I never even thought that designing, knitwear design would be something that I would do. And I think, maybe that's true of a lot of people who kind of fall into it. You're knitting something that you want for yourself, and you're writing down the instructions to do that. And then, you say, oh, well, why not? I'll give it a shot. I'll put it out there. I'll see if, somebody likes it, and it just kind of snowballs from there.
That's super inspiring, because I'm trying to work on my first design, like trying to publish my first design. I have so many ideas and I just can't get over that hump. I think I just have to just do it, put it out there and see what happens. I wanted to ask, does your computer programming background, do you find it coming into your knitwear design at all? Like, do you ever connect the two together?
I do think, maybe not like consciously, but I do think that it does play a role, like when I was a programmer before I was like in charge of programmers, but when I did it myself, I was always trying to find like the, cleanest, the best way to solve the problem, with the, that's the clearest and most concise. And, so I always like put a lot into making sure that my programming was clean and understandable. And that I took into consideration that, people looking at it may not know the things that I know. And so, you have to come at it from the perspective of, this person doesn't know anything about what is in your head. So you need to make sure that you're getting it down in a way that anybody could pick it up and work on it in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. So can you tell us a little bit about your inspiration behind the Saraya shawl?
Yeah, so I think I've said this before, all the colors I absolutely love, but for me, this color was kind of like love at first sight. And so that kind of stuck in my mind, love at first sight. And, I had watched Bridgerton, and,
yes.
I was just thinking romantic love and, something that's flirty, and that color red was very, very pretty. So I thought something that kind of has like a romantic feel. And so that semicircular shawl was kind of something that I wanted to do for a while. And so it was the perfect project for this, and just coming up with what should it look like, that, was the piece that, I had to finally figure out. But I knew that it was going to be a semicircular shawl. I love the color coquelicot. Those two, that was the starting point, and everything came from there.
Yeah, such a great design. She writes about it in the book as well. So if you have the Worsted book, you can read more about that. I think that we're going to jump to Julia's questions. Julia, go ahead.
Hey, Saysha. So what kind of things do you knit for yourself?
So like Tif, I knit lots of shawls and lots of hats. Hats are quick. So like if you want, just something on your needles, a quick hat. I love sweaters, but I don't knit a lot of sweaters. And I would say that if I'm knitting a sweater, it's probably going to be a cardigan, because I heat up, and so like having something that's heavy on or whatever is not ideal for me. But I love sweaters, but I don't knit a lot of them. And when I do knit them, I actually give them away. So like most of the sweaters that I've ever knit, somebody else has them. So I don't even, like when I'm, doing something like this and I'm trying to find like a knitted sweater, I'm like, oh my God, I don't have anything.
Well, the one that you're wearing is very beautiful.
Yeah, tell everyone about your sweater, because we always talk about our knitwear.
Yeah, so this is just, I mean, it is a circular knit sweater. So any circular pattern you could use, circular knit yoke pattern. This particular one though is ranunculus. So I'm going to try to scooch up a little bit so you can see.
Oh my God, that's so cute.
I dropped the back a little bit with some short rows.
Yeah.
Cute.
So it's the yarn that does the work. So you could use any circular yoke sweater pattern. For me, I used ranunculus and I just eliminated all of the fancy stuff. I only did the increases. And so this nubby yarn, both yarns are actually dyed by local people here in New Jersey. One of them is dyed by Lauren Color Wheel Yarns, and the other one by Stephanie, who has a yarn store here near me called Winterberry's Yarn. And so both of these are from local yarn dyers.
Ah, beautiful. The texture is great.
Yeah, the texture is just amazing. And obviously I love that color.
It's very yellow brick road.
I know it is. And I love that color too. I love that color too.
That's so good. What are you working on now? What do you have on your needles?
So I am working on a design for Woolfolk. So I don't have it, you know, out and can show it or anything like that. I had a customer come in the store and she liked my Willow Moon cowl, which is a brioche cowl.
Yes.
That has like these branches. And I actually did a version of that called Whispering Willow with Aimée. That's a shawl. And she liked the stitch and she wanted a scarf. And you would think that it would be like, oh, just take columns 1 and 2 and just, you know, or whatever, you know, go start here and end there. But I had to kind of figure it out. Like, how could you make these stitches into a scarf? Anyhow, so the other night I stayed up until like midnight writing out instructions for her to do a scarf. So I think I may release a kind of scarf version of the Willow series.
Oh, wow.
The trilogy. It'll be the final Willow. And, you know, I want to maybe use like mohair and something pink and, you know, probably call it like Pussy Willow or something. I'll put little nups on there. And I was swatching for it. So you can see, I don't know if you can see this or not. Like I started trying to put little nups in right where the
pretty
creased out.
Oh my gosh, that's so pretty.
So, you know, I'm playing around with it right now and we'll see.
What weight do you think you want to knit it? On fingering weight?
Well, you know, I love fingering weight. So again, like Tif, stealing all my answers. If I had to pick like a weight of yarn or, you know, whatever, it would be I have so much fingering weight yarn. I love fingering weight, but I'd probably do it thicker, like maybe, I mean, it could be like a fingering weight held with a mohair, which would make it like more like a DK weight. Yeah. Or I could do a DK with a mohair to make it even bulkier, you know, because it would be skinny, like a skinny little scarf.
And wrap it around a few times.
Yeah. Just something skinny.
Very nice.
Yeah. So that may round out the Willow, the Willow series.
So when you have time to knit for yourself, so when you're not designing, what do you knit for yourself?
I do mostly knit shawls and hats. I have been knitting socks because I had this desire to have like a sock wardrobe, and I've been failing miserably at my sock wardrobe. But we just got I know that I've, you know, been watching your lives when you've been doing the cranking sock tubes.
The sock machine.
Yeah, and so I work part-time at Yarnia in Montclair, New Jersey, and we just got a sock cranking machine. And so I've been cheating just a little bit recently and cranking out some tubes.
It's really addicting. I mean, I have a lot of tubes. Now I need to teach myself to do the heels on the machine. So that's like my next goal. I think for over Christmas break, I'll take some time to do that. But it is fun, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So you work at a yarn shop?
I do. So I work part-time 3 days a week at the yarn store. And, you know, I get to, you know, help people with their knitting. And I get to be surrounded by all the beautiful yarn. I look all day at your yarn. It's right across from me. I get to just, you know,
that's wonderful.
Just look at it all day long.
That's wonderful. Okay, so I have a couple fun questions for you. If you could be a knitting technique, what knitting technique would you be?
So, you know, I'm kind of torn between two different ones. Definitely, you know, I love brioche and all that you can do with brioche. So it would probably be brioche, but another technique that I really love is the Kitchener stitch. And I know a lot of people hate the Kitchener stitch, and but you know, I think it's so magical, you know, like to do the Kitchener stitch and have things seamlessly go together and use it for, right now I have a customer who wants me to finish off a sweater for her. So I'm going to, you know, do a tubular bind off, you know, with basically it's a Kitchener stitch.
Yeah.
To bind off. And I love that. I love doing that.
I love Kitchener stitch too. I mean, I've been knitting for over 20 years and I just literally figured out a way from my mind to remember how to do it. Before I'd always have to have like a little, you know, a little pense-bête, I don't know what we say, like a little clue
reminder
while I would do it. And I could never remember. And I just recently over the pandemic taught myself how to remember how to do it. So now it's completely magical. Before I used to avoid it. I'd be like, oh, somebody finish the sock for me because like,
yeah, it's just, you got to keep that mantra, you know, that knit off, purl on, purl off, knit on, you know, as long as you keep the mantra going and try not to stop, you know what I'm saying? Like finish it. You're good to go.
All right. So what's your desert island yarn? If you were stuck on a desert island, which yarn would you take with you?
So, I mean, it would definitely be a fingering weight yarn. I love fingering. I'm going to say it would be cashmerino.
Yeah.
LBA cashmerino. We have a customer who comes in with her baby, a little boy, and he has a little cashmerino cap that she puts on him. And it's made with, the outside is Winterfell. It's like a double knit hat. So the outside is Winterfell and the inside is like a gray color. I don't know what color it is.
Cute.
But I love that little hat so much. And every time somebody purchases a skein of it, I am there petting it like the entire time. I can barely like, you know, complete the sale without like rubbing it around my neck, rubbing my hands all over it. It's so soft.
Yeah, it really is. So I wanted to see, I think a couple of your test knitters are in the audience here. If they're there, can you guys raise your hand? And I'd like to bring you forward so you can come say hi. Let's see. Hi. All right, so we've got, I'm going to unmute Evelyn.
Hi.
Hi, Evelyn. How are you?
Excellent. How are you?
Good. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your knitting origin story.
Oh, my knitting origin story. So my mother and my grandmother taught me to knit when I was, I'm going to say 5 or 6. And so I've been knitting for more than 40 years. And
wow.
I have ADHD and they were trying to find something to occupy me. So my first thing that I knit was a vest for myself.
The first thing you knit was a vest. That's incredible.
That I designed actually, because my mother is a dressmaker and my grandmother was a doll maker. And so there was sewing everywhere. And so what did we do? We used patterns. So my mother gave me a brown paper bag and I opened up the brown paper bag and I measured my body and I drew the outline on a piece of brown paper because I was little, you know, so my little body could fit in a brown paper bag. And I would knit and I would hold it up to the bag and I would knit and hold it up. And she had to help me, of course, with the decreases and stuff. But yeah, the first thing, it was a weird acrylic green vest that I made.
That's incredible.
So I've been knitting nonstop and I love it. It's some famous knitter once coined, if you've seen me, you've seen me knitting. I knit in church. If I'm sitting, I'm knitting. I knit in church and I knit in all the inappropriate places. I'm in seminary right now and I'm going to tell you, I tried. I pulled out my knitting. I was working on a sock, and my professor's like, yeah, no, don't do that. First time, because I knit all through college. None of my professors had a problem with it. Because I have difficulty paying attention because of my ADHD. And if I can knit, it helps me to sort of, I don't know, take up that excess attention.
Yeah.
If I'm in a place where I cannot knit, I'm doodling, I'm drawing, I'm writing. I love knitting, and
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how long have you been test knitting?
Oh, I heard that question before, and I really can't tell you forever. I did sample knitting before test knitting was really a thing. I did sample knitting. When I was pregnant with my first daughter, I was sample knitting for a designer. She just sent me a box of yarn and, the pattern, and I just knit it up and sent it back to her. So,
wow. I'm going to go follow you on Instagram. I want to see your knitting.
That's exactly what I'm doing right now.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. So how did you like test knitting for Saraya?
Oh, I love this pattern. It's beautiful. I don't know if you can.
Wow.
It's this beautiful, so I grew up in Oregon, and this yarn is Knit Picks, High Desert. And so the yarn, the wool is grown and spun. It's grown from sheep that live in Oregon, and it's spun in Oregon. So
wow.
I've been shopping at Knit Picks forever. And so when they came up with this yarn, I was looking for a project. And then I teach knitting in the shop where Saysha, it's Yarnia in Montclair. So I teach knitting where she works. And I was in there shopping one time, and she mentioned that she was designing a worsted weight shawl. And I was like, so yeah. So I just love it. It's so squishy and comfortable, and it's just beautiful. This reads a little bit more purple.
Yeah. But it's more blue.
It's more blue. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so
tell us the yarn again that you used. What was the yarn?
I want to say it's High Desert.
High Desert by Knit Picks. I believe
is the name of it, for Knit Picks. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a lovely, it's non-superwash, but it is not rustic at all. It's soft and squishy, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah. That's wonderful. It's really beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Evelyn. All right. So we're going to move over to iPhone. Hello. I'm going to ask to unmute. Hi.
Hi.
My name's Amy. What's your name?
My name is Debbie. How are you? Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Debbie. Tell us about your knitting origin story.
Well, I love knitting from a very young little girl, but at that time there really wasn't any knitting shops. And then eventually one did open, and I wasn't able to drive there yet, and my mom would take me, and I knew that this was a passion. And so the woman that owned the store helped me to make a really beautiful sweater. And once I completed the sweater, I'm like, oh God, I found my niche in life. I love it. So the store closed down right after that. I was heartbroken. And so my mom, we had a little summer place down the shore, a little bungalow. And so my mom and a couple of friends would be knitting and crocheting on the beach. And like everybody, my brothers and, my sisters, everybody were out there, and, they're all having fun in the water. And I'm like just mesmerized by the colors. And I mean, I just fell in love back then. So years went by, and of course, I got married, I had children, and, again, there really was no place around for me to do this. So about 7 years ago, I found a little shop, and it was about an hour and a half away from where I live. But I said, I'm just getting in that car, I'm getting on that turnpike, and I'm going to do it. And so I've been knitting, I'm going to say about 7 years now. And I mean, it is the most wonderful thing. I mean, people just see it and they're like, oh my God, did you make that? And you just like, it just does something to you. Like when somebody just like really takes notice to something that you're creating. So that's how that all began. And that's about it.
That's incredible. I mean, it's completely relatable. I think that everybody's like shaking their head right now that they can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
So how long have you been test knitting?
This is my first test knit.
Amazing.
Yes, my first test knit. I walked into Yarnia, and I had been going for a little bit. And I walked in, and I was there to actually pick out, or Saysha helped me to pick out a color for a sweater that she was making. So she helped me pick it out. And behind the counter, I see this color. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God, I love this color. So she helped me pick out, and I said, Saysha, what is that behind there? I love it. I love it. The color is unbelievable. And I had heard of your yarn. And so she told me what it was. And I said to her, you know, like, what design is that going to be? Well, it's something that I'm writing up, she said, and hopefully eventually it'll be, you know, available. And I said, well, please keep me in mind if you do. I said, because I just love it. So anyway, when I went back in a few months later, Saysha had come up to me and asked me if I would like to be a test knitter. And I really didn't know much about it, but I said, yes, I would love to give it a try. And I contained myself in the store. But when I got out into the car, I can't tell you the happy dance I'm doing out there. My husband's like, why are you so excited? I'm like, Tom, you can't believe it. I said, but I'm asked to be a test knitter. I don't know much about it, but when I get home, I'm going to research it. But I knew I just fell in love with this when I saw it. And I couldn't wait for it to get cold to start wearing it. And, you know, still yet it's warm, but I did wear it about a week and a half ago, and I wore it into the store. And even before I finished it, like, I can remember just sitting there and envisioning the coats that I wanted to put on with it. And I mean, I did knit a lot of shawls for myself, but I have to say, this is so unique. It's so beautiful, and the workmanship that's in it. And you never got bored. I mean, my husband would be like, where are you sneaking off to at night? You know, because he'd say, why aren't we going to finish the movie? And it was like, I couldn't wait for supper to be done, the dishes to be done, the kids to be like gone, the grandkids to be gone. And it's like, I didn't even want the dogs upstairs. I want to concentrate. I finished this shawl, I'm going to say maybe in 5 weeks or 6 weeks at the most, because I couldn't put it down. It just kept you on your toes, but in such a wonderful way that to create something this beautiful, I am truly, truly honored that she asked me. It is beautiful.
Well, we're truly thankful that you test knitted this shawl. I mean, honestly, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story. You said so many things that we can all relate to about what knitting does for us and makes us feel. Thank you.
It does. You're welcome. You're so welcome. And I just love your yarn. I already purchased some more from Yarnia, by the way.
Well, thank you so much. It was so lovely to meet you.
Same here. Same here.
All right. We're coming up to the end of our session here. Julia, did you see any questions in the chat that we should address?
Yes, I've answered a couple. Diane asked what the yardage was for Saraya. So I said it calls for 5 skeins of Corrie and 1,150 yards.
Okay, that's great.
So
Tif, are you still out in the audience? Can you raise your hand? Because I can't actually find you. I wanted to pin you back up here again.
Yeah.
Ah, there you go. Thank you. Okay, well, this was our first of a series of knit nights that Julie and I are going to be hosting. And maybe Zach and Justin will jump into some of the future ones that we'll have when they're available and not being world famous opera singers all over the world. But I really appreciate all of you joining us tonight. This is recorded, so I'm going to be throwing this up on YouTube if you guys wanted to jump back on and see anything that we had talked about tonight. So I just want to recap. Saraya is the design by Saysha Greene from Worsted, and Julia is wearing Stratified, the design by Tif Neilan from my book Worsted. Thank you, Saysha. Thank you, Tif, for joining us. It was so fun having you guys here.
Thank you, Amy. This was so much fun.
And thank you to all the test knitters who joined us as well. So in the future sessions that we have with the designers, we're going to be inviting all the test knitters as well to join us. So, all right, you guys have a great evening. Thank you so much. And we'll see you soon for another virtual knit night. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.